Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said Sunday that the president is being careful in assessing his campaign promise to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. President Trump's administration has revived the topic in recent weeks ahead of Trump's visit next week to the Middle East. The president, I think rightly, has taken a very deliberative approach to understanding the issue itself, listening to input from all interested parties in the region, and understanding, in the context of a peace initiative, what impact would such a move have, Tillerson said on NBC's Meet the Press when asked about the possibility of moving the embassy to Jerusalem. As you know, the president has recently expressed his view that he wants to put a lot of effort into seeing if we cannot advance a peace initiative between Israel and Palestine, he continued. And so I think in large measure the president is being very careful to understand how such a decision would impact a peace process. Tillerson said he thinks the president will make an informed decision on the issue. I think it'll be informed, again, by the parties that are involved in those talks, Tillerson said. And most certainly Israel's view on whether Israel views it as being helpful to a peace initiative or perhaps a distraction. And so again, I think the president's being very measured in how he goes about this. And appropriately so. In a statement Sunday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said moving the embassy would not only not harm the peace process, rather the opposite, according to the Washington Post. It would advance it by amending a historic wrong and by shattering the Palestinian fantasy that Jerusalem isn't the capital of Israel, he said in a statement. The United Nations does not recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. During his presidential campaign, Trump told the American Israel Public Affairs Committee at its conference, "We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem." Since then, Trump has demurred on the timing of moving the embassy, which is currently located in Tel Aviv. Vice President Mike Pence said earlier this month the president is still seriously considering moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. During an April interview, the president demurred when asked if he might use his trip to Israel in May to announce the change in the embassy's location. President Donald Trump is still undecided whether to relocate the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said Sunday. Speaking with NBC's Meet the Press, Tillerson said President Trump was being very careful in his approach to the issue, and wanted to take both sides' considerations into account when rendering a decision. The president is being very careful to understand how such a decision would impact the peace process, said Tillerson. On the campaign trail, Trump promised to implement the 1995 Jerusalem Embassy Act, a law passed with broad bipartisan support during the Clinton administration that calls for the transfer of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. The law also requires the government to recognize Jerusalem as the undivided capital of Israel. But since his inauguration, President Trump has remained mum on whether he will make good on his campaign promise. According to Tillerson, Trump is weighing the effect of an embassy move on his plans for restarting negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, with the ultimate aim of reaching a final status agreement. The president, I think rightly, has taken a very deliberative approach to understanding the issue itself, listening to input from all interested parties in the region, and understanding in the context of a peace initiative, what impact would such a move have. As you know, the president has recently expressed his view that he wants to put a lot of effort into seeing if we cannot advance a peace initiative between Israel and Palestine. While Tillerson suggested other regional powers would influence the decision, the Secretary of State added that Israel itself would have to decide whether the embassy move would be beneficial to the negotiating process, or would only serve as a distraction, implying that perhaps the Netanyahu government itself had taken a definitive stand on the matter. I think it'll be informed by the parties that are involved in those talks, and most certainly Israel's view on whether Israel views it as helpful to a peace initiative, or perhaps, a distraction. Yet Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu went on record last week stating that all countries with diplomatic ties to Israel, the U.S. included, should transfer their embassies to Israel's capital. President Donald Trump is assessing whether moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem would help or hurt prospects for clinching an Israeli-Palestinian peace deal, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said, revealing Trump's criteria for a decision that could reverberate throughout the volatile Middle East. Since taking office, Trump has backed away from his campaign pledge to move the embassy in a gesture to Israel, instead saying he's still studying the issue. But Tillerson linked Trump's deliberations directly to his aspirations for brokering Mideast peace. The president is being very careful to understand how such a decision would impact the peace process, Tillerson said in an interview broadcast Sunday on NBC's Meet the Press. He said Trump's decision would be informed by feedback from all sides, including whether Israel views it as helpful to a peace initiative or perhaps a distraction. Trump's decision is being closely watched as the president prepares to depart Friday on his first foreign trip. After stopping in Saudi Arabia, Trump will visit both Israel and the Palestinian territories, in a nod to his nascent bid to strike the Israeli-Palestinian deal that has eluded his predecessors. Jerusalem's status is one of the most emotionally charged issues in the conflict, with both sides laying claims. Israel captured East Jerusalem, claimed by Palestinians for the capital of a future independent state, from Jordan in 1967 and annexed it, a move not internationally recognized. U.S. presidents of both parties have repeatedly waived a U.S. law requiring the embassy be moved to Jerusalem. The most recent waiver, signed by former President Barack Obama, expires on June 1. Trump is expected to sign a 6-month renewal of the waiver before it expires, as he continues deliberating. In another sign, the White House is proceeding cautiously. Trump's ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, plans to work out of the current embassy in Tel Aviv rather than out of the U.S. consulate in Jerusalem, as some had urged him to do. Friedman, who owns an apartment in Jerusalem, is expected to live in the U.S. ambassador's official residence in the Tel Aviv suburb of Herzliya. Palestinians argue moving the embassy would prejudge one of the most sensitive issues in the conflict, undermining America's status as an effective mediator. There have been some signs that the Israeli government, while publicly supportive of moving the embassy, has quietly raised concerns that doing so could inflame the political and security situation. In a statement to the media Sunday, Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu claimed that moving the embassy would be good for peace. Israel's position has been stated many times to the American government and to the world, he said. Moving the American embassy to Jerusalem would not only not harm the peace process, rather the opposite. It would advance it by amending a historic wrong and by shattering the Palestinian fantasy that Jerusalem isn't the capital of Israel. There was no immediate Palestinian reaction. In the interview, Tillerson downplayed suggestions that the U.S. needed to deal decisively with Russia's interference in the U.S. election before it could pursue better relations with Moscow. Though Tillerson said he'd seen the intelligence implicating Russia and believed there was no question Russia meddled, he said it was just one of a broad range of important issues that have to be addressed in the U.S.-Russia relationship. He said the notion of a reset with Russia, which both Obama and President George W. Bush pursued, was misguided. You cannot erase the past. You cannot start with a clean slate, Tillerson said. We're starting with the slate we have, and all the problems we have are in that slate. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson told NBC's Meet the Press on Sunday that President Donald Trump is proceeding very cautiously with regard to moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I think the president's being very measured in how he goes about this, and appropriately so, Tillerson said. In particular, Trump wants to consider the impact such a move could have on a potential peace process between Israel and the Palestinians. Trump wants to put a lot of effort into seeing if we cannot advance a peace initiative between Israel and Palestine, and so I think in large measure the president is being very careful to understand how such a decision would impact a peace process, Tillerson explained. The president, I think rightly, has taken a very deliberative approach to understanding the issue itself. listening to input from all interested parties in the region and understanding, in the context of a peace initiative, what impact would such a move have. Shortly after Tillerson made his comments, Education Minister Naftali Bennett urged Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to clarify to the Trump administration that a significant portion of Israel's population continues to expect the embassy move to finally happen. Countries from across the world place their embassies in Washington, D.C., thus this needs to be applied in Jerusalem, our capital for 3,000 years, Bennett wrote on Twitter, adding that moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel, to Jerusalem, strengthens Israel and strengthens the prospects for peace. Speaking at a Likud party event on Thursday, Netanyahu said that Jerusalem is the eternal capital of the Israeli people and it is fitting that all embassies, especially that of our friend the United States, be moved to Jerusalem. Most recently, as Trump pursues a peace plan between Israel and the Palestinians, Bennett criticized Netanyahu for not having outright rejected the two-state solution. Netanyahu commented on Tillerson's remarks, saying that moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem won't harm the peace process. To the contrary, it would advance the process and correct a historic injustice. Israel's stance is that all the embassies belong in Israel's capital of Jerusalem, and the U.S. Embassy should be one of the first to move.